Hello once again. This is Marshall Sanders. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're going to start doing this series on where we will try to decide what are good reparations. Now understand, this is going to be a series of many videos concerning reparations, because it's important to understand that there are many aspects to reparations. Their American thinking, like with just about everything in life, is entirely about money. But what the person of color wants more than anything is justice. And so if there is justice, then the money problems take care of themselves. However, one of the first things I'm going to address is the financial things, just to get it out of the way. I will elaborate in more other videos on what these things will cause as a benefit, not only to the black person who is a descendant of the slaves specifically, but also, even perhaps more so, an advantage to those who are called whites. A lot of what you're going to hear next and in the subsequent videos has to do with my evaluation on a situation that occurred in Israel, because it's very telling to have a recent history of 80 years to be something that we can also say should happen from as long as 400 years, but exists even today in many ways, of slavery amongst the black people of this country. Note that I do not mean all black people. To think that it applies in every way to every black person is not right. Much as some would say there are many millionaires, and there's even select billionaires that are black. Obviously, we know that does not extend to the black people. Exceptions are not rules. And neither would you say the same thing happened in Israel. There were a reported 6 million Jews that fell under the sword, if you will, of Adolf Hitler in Germany. Now, whether we take that number as true or not is besides the point. The point is that people were slaughtered in Israel, in Germany rather. Amongst them were Israelis, Polish, Gypsies, and many others that we are aware of. Now, the situation of that situation, when it happened within an 11-year span in terms of the persecution, and then subsequently, perhaps in about a 3 or 4 year period, the execution of many Israeli people. That people were men, women, and children. Not only that, there was the torture of many being starved to death. Not only that, but many of them being branded. We see the victims of many of those who were in the concentration camps, and how even today they have a tattoo which appears to be unremovable from them, still printed on their forearms. Now, why am I getting to the Israeli aspect? Because so many people like to say, oh, it's ancient history. Those people are clearly children of the white matrix. And in many cases, they're simply racist. But not to address either one of those cases, because again, as I said before, I'm going to start to lay out a plan. Now, one of the first questions someone's going to ask is, how do you pay for that? I'm going to come to that. And I believe that solution is you're going to find to be very, very pleasing. However, to not procrastinate further, let me continue with the story of Israel. Now, Israel was not yet a country at that time when they basically left the camps in 1944-45. Many Israelis leaving Germany, not trusting that the war was over, went into many countries. They even came to the United States. And do you want to know what the response of the United States was? Well, to proclaim what America proclaims of itself, give me your poor and your weary and such other things that is written on the Statue of Liberty. Many Jews took that as heart, and they actually went into the harbor of New York. Well, summarily, they were met with a military force that told them if they left the boat to come to New York and to jump off that ship, they would be shot. A few tried. A few failed to meet their objective. So let's not say that America has greeted its poor and its weary without exceptions. And amongst those are black people. But I digress. So the Jewish state was determined, I believe, in 1947 and executed in 1948. Within 5 years, Germany, which was at that point occupied by both the United States and Russia, in the beginning of a Cold War settling in between those two nations, the German leadership decided, that reparations, if you want to call that name, were in order for the Jewish people for the crimes committed against them. Now, understandably, while they were forming a nation in Israel, many of the Israelis were adamant that it not be accepted from these people. After all, they said, this would be like acknowledging or being paid off for the crimes committed against us. However, the leadership at that time, after many protests and violent protests between both sides of the government, it was determined, however, to take a settlement from Germany. And to galvanize the people, here's a quote by their leader at the time. The Israel PM stated, there are two approaches, he told the Central Committee. One is the ghetto laws approach, and the other is of an independent people. I don't want to run after a German and spit in his face. I don't want to run after anybody. I want to sit here and build here. I'm not going to go to America to take part in a vigil against Adenauer, which was the leader, unquote. In other words, the time of being bitter and wanting revenge, this is not that time. This is the time to build. This is the time to get justice, yes. And we know we're not going to get a righteous fullness of justice. It's not going to bring back the victims. It's not going to make things right. You cannot make things right. But what this will do is will finally allow us as a people to build, to have an income that we can build, and we cannot search out our own justice by simply being a people having not received justice. We can now look and say we have a model to build that includes a country and a people who will value justice. So with that in mind, I'm going to take what Germany did that is so successful. To this day, no nation has done a better job of reparations to a people than the German people. What has been a byproduct of that is Israel and Germany have an excellent relationship. Are you aware of that? 80 years ago, it would be inconceivable to believe that the Germans and the Israelis would have a very good relationship. And yet, in less than 30 years actually, they had a good relationship that has only gotten better and better and better throughout the years. All because Germany decided to do its small part in making a small contribution in comparison, of course, to reparations. So with that in mind, I would like to unveil my idea of reparations. And again, this is one of many videos that I'm going to do. If you have questions or comments, please include them in the comment section. I will answer them as soon as possible. But just so you understand, this, what I'm speaking first, is the first step. And I will comment throughout as I give you this information. I will also include the money or the amount that is needed for perspective on this as I go along. Now, I want you to understand something. Most Germans did not participate in the death camps of Jews, but they all agreed to pay for the whole. You see, just like most of us do not get abortions, and most of us do not get and do a lot of the things that we're forced to pay for. The American mindset on taxation, which is actually illegal by our Constitution, is that they fall to a default, or the white matrix default, which is to say, but this pays for our roads, this pays for our infrastructure, this pays for our public utilities and such other things. Pardon me. Which is actually only in very, very, very small part true. Most of our money goes to war efforts, meaning machinery, meaning weapons, meaning personnel. So your taxes are not paying what you believe your taxes are paying for. However, I digress. Because the Germans agreed that whatever their tax monies were paying for, as long as it benefited the people. And we can see that it benefited the German people quite well. So without further ado, let me start. As a direct deposit to roughly 40 million black Americans who are descendants of the slaves. Included in this, of course, are those who have whited. For those who are not familiar with that term, there was a law that if you had 1/8 or even in some cases 1/16 of black blood in you. You were forbidden to marry certain people or get loans or such other things. You were, even though you appear 100% white, well, you were whiteballed. So, even those people are included in this reparation because they are, in fact, descendants of slaves. So, $100,000 to 40 million projected people descendant of black slaves would come out to $4 trillion. Now note I said to every individual, man, woman, or child. It is the same in any other kind of settlement that happens even today in court, where the family members are given equal access to a whole. This would allow blacks to make decisions here in this country as well as the decision to do other things. But I'm going to get to that in a second. A life insurance policy for up to $500,000 to the same 100 million, to the same, I should say, 40 million people. That would come out to about $100 billion. But this policy would be for a 3-year policy. The reason why I say a 3-year policy and not a 10 or 20 or some other policy is because we do not want the insurance companies to collapse. In fact, we want the insurance companies to thrive. The insurance companies is how people in America have built up generational wealth. After all, though we don't want to put a monetary value on a person's life, when a person dies, we certainly do not want to be paying for that person and their death. A life insurance policy will ensure almost a cease of black crime because they would value the person's life, including their own, much more, knowing the financial loss that they generate. However, those who do have their life taken away can have the assurance that it would pay well to their families to receive these things. The next one. Health and human experimentation on blacks' healthcare costs. For those of you who do not know of the experimentation that I'm talking about, the Tuskegee Airmen and such others, including regular blacks, when they came to a doctor, 1 in 5 were injected with such things as tuberculosis. They were injected with such things as things that are experimental in nature, medically experimental in nature. There is the cause of such things as sickle cell anemia and such other diseases that are found in blacks even to today. So, they caused a health crisis, and 1 in 5 blacks, when they were able to go to a doctor, those people should have medical bills paid on their part. And if nothing else, they should have the medical care due to the ones who caused it in the first place. A $100 billion policy for 3 years would allow those to receive the maximum ability of being taken care of, whether in this country or a different country. The placement of nationality fund allowing a return to Africa for $70 billion over a 3-year exception period. You're going to hear that as a running theme in terms of 3-year policy, and I will explain later why I say only or why 3-year policy. You see, one of the most common things that a person of color hears when he brings the truth of the white matrix and reparations to the ears of many whites is the growing disappointment of the whites in their reaction. Mainly, their words that they speak is, if you don't like this country, then leave it and go back to Africa. Though their sarcastic and racist minds mean it as a negative, to many blacks, that is actually a very good idea and one that is desirable. So just as Germany did also this policy, I believe it's also the same thing, that many people who were United States and other parts of the world wanted to relocate it to the newly formed Israeli state, and yet did not have the capital to do so. If the government is sincere and the people are sincere in wanting us to go back to a country, or a continent rather, because we are being un-American, then perhaps we should be paid to go back to the country or the continent in which we would like to attend, even if that is in Africa. That policy, as I mentioned before, would be a $70 billion policy, giving people the option over 3 years. Now, housing and care loans for elderly and child care. Now, an additional $70 billion for that. Now, I know many people will say, well, how does that equate? Why should we pay for your elderly? Well, as any affluent and unaffluent person that is not of color knows, some people are better put into elderly adult care, but cannot, when their medical and their mental aspects cannot be afforded at home. Many people are limited in their jobs because they have to take care of the elderly person, and therefore they cannot take jobs or work hours in order to build up the finances in the situation of their own home. Therefore, putting in this elderly care exception, as well as for the daycare of many young, would give an incentive and an opportunity for many blacks to actually go to work, even in a small part. And that is because one of the other exceptions I'm going to explain along with this is going to make America great for once. But I'll get back to that in a moment. A black defense fund for incarcerated blacks who had no representation. That would be a $9 billion over 3-year policy. Now understand, though I am not a person who spends much time on TV, I do like a good movie. And one of my favorite movies was Shawshank Redemption. Shawshank Redemption is a guy named Andy Dufresne. For those who have not seen it, is one of the best movies ever, in my humble opinion. Andy Dufresne was a man wrongly convicted of killing his wife and her lover. And he spent untold years being tormented and even raped repeatedly for a crime he did not commit. And when Andy Dufresne came there, they recognized his extreme abilities as a tax attorney. And so the guards and such other ones came here to him for advice. And he made a good way inside the prison to many. Well, Andy Dufresne, while walking with some friends, said, you know, when I was outside of jail, I was straight as an arrow, never cheated anything. It took me to come to prison to become a thief. And I believe that certainly is something also with so many people who have been in jail. They've seen the injustice of this injustice system, and they've given up all hope. And they've resorted, not having job options and such other things, to crime. After all, what would you do if you seek a job to work and they tell you you cannot be hired, and you, knowing that you did not commit the crime in the first place, have to deal with the negative aspects of that? What else would you do? It's easy to judge a person's life, but it's very hard to actually think about them in the human aspect and the aspect of what you yourself would do. Now, these are what I call specialized reparations. These things are very important, and I'm going to elaborate because these support the things I just mentioned. Now, the first thing is no land, federal or state taxes for every black slave descendant for a 3-year period. That should be self-explanatory, but for those who are still in the white matrix, nothing of what anything I just said is self-explanatory. But for those of you who are willing to hear, that 3-year exception of no taxes is perhaps the best thing the white ear should want to hear. Why? Because many people get the impression that blacks do not want jobs because of their own racism and because of their white matrix. As I mentioned in the other video, it's amazing that blacks get the reputation of being lazy, and yet it is the black slaves that actually worked while the whites did not do the work. So if blacks are lazy, what do you call the whites who did not do the work but forced the blacks to do the work? Interesting dynamic, isn't it? This idea of no land and taxes would give people of color the biggest boost to want to work and to go even harder to work. After all, knowing that you do not have to pay any taxes would give you the incentive in that 3-year window, of course, to want to accumulate as much money as possible. Not only that, many people are on public assistance. By having an income, from what I mentioned at first, in that first year of a check that was issued to them for $100,000, they would no longer be considered a person who could receive government assistance. Therefore, all of the money that is meant and taken from government assistance from so many of those blacks that people believe take up all this room, despite the fact that by far more whites are on government assistance than black, the perception looms that blacks are all on public assistance. However, the money saved by the government and the American people from the money that blacks would not work could be happy to know that so many huge a percentage of these black people would not be on government assistance any longer, nor would they ever expect to be ever again. So consider that as your net positive because of this. This is another one. The release of all in prison for felony weed use and voting rights restored, and a cleared record in 7 years. This is important to me. I've mentioned all of the crimes, the so-called crimes that people have committed that are extremely unconstitutionally, and yet 75%, yes, 75% of people of color are affected by these so-called war on drugs. And then you get a person like John Boehner, who comes out of Congress and immediately makes millions basically selling and distributing and representing weed distributors. That is utterly, completely ridiculous. And so those who were convicted and thrown in jail for such an extended amount of time for smoking weed, of any color that is, should be let out immediately. However, we do want their voting rights and such other things restored. And you do not know what they have learned in prison or how their mindset is after being incarcerated for such a long time. A 3 to 7 year process to ensure that they do not get in trouble at all. Well, they may get in trouble, but what I mean is convicted of something that they may have done as opposed to not have done. As long as they keep a clean record, that their record, just like in many cases even today, should be expunged, and they should be given every right of a person who served their sentence and their things that was taken being restored, and that amongst those will be voting rights. Also, this is one that's very close to me. There's business reparations for lost and destroyed property, and up to $1 trillion made available for this. Black Wall Street in 1921 comes to mind. I've mentioned this in my other videos, but as I mentioned before, with Black Wall Street, and this has happened multiple times, despite all of the things that blacks have had to deal with in this country, Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma built up one of the most successful and the biggest business ventures in the entire United States. Its success was known throughout the entire United States and exceeded most white ventures. In 1921, it was bombed from the heavens, if you will, from the bombs of very evil men, legally, and they killed 500 and 800 were wounded, or vice versa. I always get that wrong, it seems. But 1,300 victims, and their business is completely destroyed, and no reparations, nor justice for them. For those who are involved in those and other things that were taken away, a fund should be established that never rises above $1 trillion, and perhaps not many would even come and be close to that figure. But making that money available for those affected, had their businesses, their livelihoods, their families taken away, well then, this is just a criminal act that should be rewarded as a judgment for those who were victimized. Next, a posthumous, and this is the most important one to me, by the way, a posthumous and present crime investigations bill. And this includes, again, for those who are white victims, such as Quakers, such as abolitionists, and others, and hippies, by the way, and others. Because crimes were committed, and many of the crimes were by police officers and other professionals. And yet the investigation was never even conducted, much less was there a conclusion of who had committed the crime, even though it was very apparent who had committed the crime. So, money, time, investigators to get justice, even posthumously, of those who had committed this crime. Not only that, since those of you who are still in the white matrix, and also races. What would you say then concerning the Nuremberg trials in which America had for those who committed atrocities in Germany? We had nothing to do with the prosecution that Germany did to the Jews. And yet even we in our country have prosecution for justice sake of the Germans involved in that. And for those who say, well, that was so long ago, do you know that the oldest person, I believe it was 60 or 30 years or 40 years, don't quote me in the time, after this person was found responsible and a member of Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime, this person was tracked down in a different country by the Israeli Mossad and brought back for justice for his crimes as a Nazi. So don't tell me that it's so long ago that the person cannot receive justice. Justice is the most important thing that you have. If you have no justice, you have no peace. And so these were the ones that I brought up as reparations and the amounts that I will that they should have. Now, I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you about the benefits. No, not to the blacks. I just mentioned those that were to the black people. I'm going to mention the ones to the white people. You see, the ignorance of so many is so extreme that it's almost like putting up a sign that says 1 + 1 = 2 is like either something that is considered laughable or is considered something that is apostasy to even suggest that 1 + 1 = 2, because the white matrix is so opposite of reality that when dealing with a certain individual, you may very well find that reality, even in small part, is very much rejected. But I'm going to tell you the benefits in a real life example, if you will. Although I wouldn't call it real life because I do not say that this actually happened, but I'm giving you a real simulation of a life, if you will allow. When blacks get the first initial money, what do you think that $100,000 check goes to? If you said their bank, you would be correct. Do you know what redlining and such other policies are? Well, I mentioned them in my video, so I ask that you go back to my videos and figure out what redlining is. But in small part, I will explain that whenever blacks move into neighborhoods, 20 cent becomes nearly 20%. Whites are encouraged to move out. The banks and such others do not give money to even clean the streets or such other things that are considered a net benefit to the neighborhoods, and therefore the property value goes down, and those whites, of course, smartly leave. And the bank's reputation is not to give blacks the finances in order to upkeep their neighborhood, and so of course the neighborhood goes down, the investment goes down, and eventually the neighborhood goes to crap. But now, when you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, what do you think the relationship with these black people are going to be? All of a sudden, these banks which hate the blacks are going to be scrambling to get the money. So they may not like the black face and they may not care for them, but they're going to want the money. You do know that banks are closing and being laid off all the time, don't you? Who are the faces would you would say would benefit from the high-end jobs? Being educated, having knowledge of the business. Who would be hired when blacks do that? Ah, the most specially skilled those people of that profession, which are white people. That means you being laid off during the COVID and such other things, you will suddenly find yourself as a former bank assistant manager, as a manager at that bank, to keep up with all of the new activity that blacks are putting into the bank. And since blacks are known to not be favorable in the sight of whites, a lot of it is simply propaganda of media and such others. Having a working relationship where you get to see, hear, understand more blacks in person would help to alleviate the stereotypes and other things that the white has learned over history. Not to mention the opportunity of making money and supporting his family in a new opportunity. Well, let's just say the only color they may be looking at you as is green, which is the color of their money that they're making. Not only that, the new jobs and the better relations with those black people will give you a better opportunity to form relationships. Those relationships can first be business relationships, but later, hopefully much sooner than later, those relationships can become personal. And you'll see not the black skin anymore, but you'll see the person, the good ones, the bad ones, and everything in between. And when that happens, you stop looking at people as a reparation project or people who do not have anything. You start looking at them as people. And you'll start doing something that blacks have been asking for since the moment we stepped off the first slave ship. To be regarded for the context of our character and not the color of our skin. That is why I made this reparation solution. And believe me, this is not even 1/10 of the solutions that I have to submit to you. Because after all, that's a lot of money, you would say. Where are we going to get this money? That's going to be coming up as soon as possible. And I will explain where to get it, how to get it, and more importantly, why it benefits you, no matter what color you are, to get it done. We are embarking on a trip where, for the first time, blacks and whites can be loaded and come right through the front door together. For the first time, you do not have to use the back door to enter. You don't have to have separate swimming pools or separate water fountains or separate bathrooms. Now, many of you say, but that was in 1964. We didn't have to do that. That's the paperwork. That's not the reality. And so, on this ship, we could go out together and we could help one another and we could all enjoy it on this cruise. Or we can watch as those who think this doesn't affect them at all, who are in the white matrix, go out and tell themselves, yes, we're the unsinkable ship. until you hit the reality of that ice ball and realize that you're sinking. And if the reality hadn't hit you soon enough, you're going to go down with that ship. And that's going to be the reality. America is a sinking ship. We've hit an ice ball. And the question is, are we going to look at each other and scramble for each other's resources and accuse one another and say that one doesn't deserve life and the other one deserves life, that one doesn't deserve justice and the other deserves justice? Or are we going to work together? Are we going to abandon this ship that's sinking and find a place where we can work together and just rebuild together? I'll leave that up to you. But this is my solution that I'm bringing to you. These are the outlines of reparations that I think will benefit the United States people, black, white, or otherwise. And this is something that I really believe was going to really revolutionize the economy. Because for the first time, a mass amount of people will have enough finances to spend at one time. More stores will be needed. More daycares will be needed. More hospitals will be needed instead of all the hospitals now furloughing their doctors and nurses, even during a so-called medical crisis of COVID-19 right now. And people will go back not to work, but to a new future, a better future. That is my hope, and that is my plan. If you have thoughts on this plan, how to make it better, someone I've not mentioned, something I have not mentioned, then please put it in the comments. But understand, again, as I've said a few times in this video, this is only the beginning steps of what I mean for reparations. And I will explain where we get this finances and where we get these other things. Oh, and by the way, if you had no problem with Obama bailing out the banks who made all kind of finances and the corporations who made all kind of finances and then used it to crash our economic system in 2007, and watched as we bailed them out for well over $3 trillion. Or if you had no problem with Donald Trump making something called the Corona Care Act, which will go for $6.2 trillion from the American people. Did you know, by the way, that that bill was not written in January, February, March of 2020? Did you know that bill was written in January 2019? 14 full months before Trump supposedly asked them to give the money. It was written, of course, in behalf of banks that needed money. So, America, you effectively had Trump give the people who stole our money, our future and our children and our grandchildren's money. Congratulations for giving billionaires more billions than they ever had before. However, I digress. So if you had no problem with roughly $10 trillion being given to you very people who have committed acts of tyranny and crime throughout America and the world, What would be your objection to doing it for those who you've admitted crimes have been done against and continue to be done against? That is far less than both of those amounts. However, please stay with me in this video and in the solutions of this series to find out what more can be done to finally make America for everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Shalom.